Thank you, distinguished delegates. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and thank you for braving the cold weather and the rain. When I left my house this morning, I felt like working from home, but unfortunately it was not possible. I'm really happy to be here with you today. We have worked quite a lot on this NDC mapping, and I'm happy to see representatives of some countries whose NDCs we've mapped. So that's really interesting, and maybe later on you will have some specific examples or issues to discuss. I'm also very happy to see African countries with which we are working closely, and also countries that were represented during the during the regional course in Nairobi. Before starting, I really want to acknowledge the great work done by Honda and the P166 program, and I encourage the delegates present here to make sure that your countries take advantage of this fantastic opportunity, because it's not only a training, it's also a fantastic networking opportunities for your trade ministry officials. And really, this is something to be followed, and so I encourage you to nominate staff from your countries. So the first presentation is on integrating trade into nationally determined contribution, current situations, and prospects. The presentation will comprise two parts. First, a bit of background, the triple planetary crisis. So, sorry, it's already a rainy day, and I will start by some not cheerful facts, but I hope to end with some elements of solution. With the second part on harnessing trade to tackle climate change, I will touch upon the articulation of climate change and trade rules. Then I will give you an overview of our findings, the findings from our NDC mapping, and then I will touch upon the elements of a framework for the inclusion of trade in NDCs. So, the triple planetary crisis. This is something you've probably heard about again and again, and I guess every time you come to these meetings, the data is worst. So sorry, I will not make exception to the trend. So we have a triple crisis: biodiversity, pollution, and climate, and the three of them are linked. From the biodiversity angle, basically 75% of land surface is significantly altered. 66% of the ocean area is experiencing increasing cumulative impacts. Over 85% of wetlands have been lost. And on an average of around 25% of plant and animal species are threatened, and around 1 million of species are likely facing extinction, many within decades. And the global rate, according to the International Panel of Experts on Biodiversity, the global rate of species extinction is already at least 10 to hundreds of times higher than it has averaged over the past 10 million years. So we are doing a very good job at destroying biodiversity. We also have a plastic pollution crisis, which is actually a threat to both biodiversity and climate. So plastic pollution soared from 2 million tons in 1950 to 348 million tons in 2017, with a global cost of tens of 100 billions, according to available estimate. And as I said, significant impacts on biodiversity and climate. Plastic waste entering ecosystems, aquatic ecosystems, is projected to approximately double from an estimated 19 to 23 million tons per year in 2016 to around 53 million tons per year by 2030. The figures vary according to institutions. Fortunately, there is a plastic treaty currently being negotiated, and hopefully it will curb this trend. If nothing changes under a business-as-usual scenario, greenhouse gas emissions associated with the production, use, and disposal of conventional fossil fuel-based plastics could represent more than 15% of the global carbon budget by 2040, which means that if you want to address climate change, you need to address plastic pollution. Otherwise, you're already starting with a significant dent in your carbon budget. And now the main dish, le plat principal, the climate crisis. In 2015, countries came together and crafted the Paris Agreement on climate change, which calls for holding eventual warming, global warming, well below 2 degrees Celsius, and for the pursuit of efforts to limit the increase even further to 1.5 degrees. So that's a very important ambition, because we know that the consequences for life as we know it, for water, for even our cities, for agricultural systems, migrations, and many other aspects would be significant if we exceed 2 degrees. Unfortunately, if we don't slow down global emission, the temperature could rise above 3 degrees Celsius by 2100, causing further irreversible damage to our ecosystems. Bit more facts. As you know, every year we have the honor of breaking a temperature record. So last year was no exception. 2023 was the warmest year on record. And the average global temperature was actually 1.45 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. If I go back to the objective of the Paris Agreement, which is limit the increase even further to 1.5, it tells you that we have a lot on our plate. Because, I mean, last year is just a year. It's not a statistical truth. But still, I mean, we were very close to the limit that we did set ourselves. And the past 9 years, 2015 to 2023, were the 9 warmest years on record since the temperatures have been recorded. On the same line, ocean heat content reached its highest level in 2023. And warming rates show a particularly strong increase in the past 2 decades. And the concentration of the 3 main greenhouse gases reached record high level in 2022, and their levels continued to increase in 2023. And according to available science, and this is something that is not new to you, CO2 emissions, greenhouse gases emissions, are the main driver of global warming. So this presentation was initially prepared for a classroom setup. I have a few questions. I'm not sure we can have interactive discussions in this type of environment. I still let the questions in my presentation, so you can just think about them. And to me, it was surprising. I had these questions for actually the regional course that we gave in Nairobi, and for us who work in trade and environment, some things are obvious, but unfortunately, they are not obvious to everyone, and it takes a lot of a dialogue, explanation, to make sure that the trade officials, and you are I assume trade experts, actually make the link between trade and climate change. So what are those questions? First one, are trade and climate action connected? Does trade make things worse? And can it make things better? Does climate change impact trade? And any other thoughts? So, I mean, we won't unfortunately have a dialogue right now. I would have wished. Maybe we could have it after. But just food for thought. And a bit of answers now. According to, I think it's a World Bank estimate, a quarter of global CO2 emissions is linked to the production and distribution of traded goods and services. So trade definitely matters to reach climate goals, because a quarter is very significant. Trade allows countries to expand the production and use of carbon-efficient or low-carbon goods. For instance, imports of LEDs, solar panels, wind turbines, or sustainably produced fruits like organic fruits. Trade can also lead to the import of an increased use of high carbon footprint goods. For instance, I come from a country where we had a ban on used cars older than, I think, 5 years. Due to political reasons, the ban was a bit eased, and people were able to import cars much older. And as a result, we had a huge increase in the number of cars in circulation, and we had a lot of old cars with like a high fuel consumption. and it led to a significant increase in pollution level, air pollution levels, with dire consequences in terms of asthma. And in my hometown, actually, some days in February or March, you have some sort of meteorological health alert, and you're told that you should not work outside, or kids should stay home. So that's a bit of a problem. Another example where trade is part of the problem, and that was very surprising to me, was a case in which the production of salmon in Northern Europe was linked to deforestation in Latin America. Because basically to feed the salmon, they were using soya, and to produce soya, they were cutting trees in the Amazon rainforest. So trade can be part of the solution, but trade can also be a big part of the problem. That's why you need the right policies and incentives, and this is something we will discuss a bit later. So trade definitely influences climate change, but climate change is also strongly influencing trade. Climate change is influencing resource availability, agricultural productivity, and ultimately it influences the ability of some countries to maintain key export sectors. So it is very important, and particularly for developing countries with sometimes limited, let's say, human resources, so limited manpower in terms of research and analysis, it's important to understand the impact of climate change on export sectors and to plan ahead. For instance, to work on drought-resistant crops or look for better suited technologies. And climate policy can also restrict market access. I will discuss the issue of technical regulations. There are also some discussions about the CBAM implemented by the EU, but not only. So climate change and trade are closely linked, and the inclusion of trade-related measures in climate policy frameworks and vice versa is crucial from both environmental and economic standpoints. So it's actually a two-way street. There is a close relationship, but it's not only how you use trade to mitigate, to support mitigation efforts, it's also how you take into account climate change to make sure that you will still be able to export and that you will maintain your level of market access. A very concrete example, before going to Nairobi, I was browsing through UNCTAD News, and I came across this. This is something that we knew was going to happen, because it was projected that there was going to be a crunch in the cocoa production. This is something that was in the air for maybe more than 5 years, but it kind of exploded recently. So the news title was "Chocolate Prices Hikes, a bittersweet reason to care about climate change." And basically, due to heat waves and intense rain in West Africa, there are very, very poor cocoa harvest. And the region produces 3/4 of the world cocoa production. So the market plummeted. And we do, at UNCTAD, we work on a project which is called Integrating Green Initiatives into National AFCFTA Strategies. This is a project that we're implementing with our colleagues from the Economic Commission for Africa, the UN Economic Commission for Africa. And as part of this project, we work on 5 African regions, and we do have prepared some trade and climate change analytical briefs for each region. And for West Africa, actually, the short to medium term impacts of climate change were exactly this: heat waves, strong winds, and intense rains. So this is not something that will go away, and this is something that will actually get possibly worse. So the weather situation, let's say climate change, has negatively impacted thousands of smallholder producers who might not have had crops at all. So what was the consequence? The consequence for the producers, no income, and consequence for the markets, global shortfall of about 374,000 tons for the 23-24 season, compared to 700,000 tons last season is expected. The prices have surged 136% between July 22 and February 24. You have the graph, and it's really scary. And the price per ton on the future market crossed $10,000 for the first time ever on March 26 this year. So this is spectacular, this is catastrophic, and this is possibly here to stay. And to give you an idea, it was the first time that I think cocoa was more expensive than vanilla, and we also worked with Madagascar. Vanilla at some point was so expensive that the vanilla farmers were sleeping in their fields with guns because people were coming and stealing unripped vanilla from the fields. So it's a very, very bad situation. And what does it tell us? The recent that it is very important to identify your climate-sensitive exports, because once again, the information about the crunch in the cocoa production was there, and that articulating exports and climate change strategy to build resilience and or identify alternative options is extremely important. As part of the project that I mentioned that we're implementing with UNECA, we have discussions with countries on the crops that they want to prioritize to take advantage of the AFCFTA. And in many cases, we were not surprised, but we noticed that climate considerations are not taken into account when prioritizing crops, which means that countries might prioritize crops that in 15 years might not be competitive or for which they might have a very low production. So it is very important not only to integrate trade into climate strategy, but integrate climate into trade strategies too. Now let's talk about the rules. I'm sorry, it might be a bit boring, this part, but David will like it. And as Rhonda said, I have a legal background, so as lawyers, we always need to know and start by what are the rules of the game. We worked with actually a university teacher, which is a rare expert on trade law and climate change law. And we came up with a snapshot of the most important rules in terms of climate change and in terms of climate change law and trade law. So climate change law is actually pretty simple with regard to trade. The main instruments, so UNFCCC in general and the Paris Agreement in particular, define the international framework for climate action. As I said, the goal of the Paris Agreement is limiting the increase in global average temperatures to well below 2 degrees Celsius. How to do that? The means, it's a bottom-up approach. So basically, countries are free to choose. It was possibly a bit difficult to agree, so countries decided that they would put their best offer, their best efforts, and hopefully, cumulatively, this would amount to what is needed to reduce climate change. So countries set their emission reduction targets and the measures that they adopt to meet these nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, which is what we have mapped, and I will discuss that later. The parties are only required to set and communicate their targets and revisit their targets every 5 years, and of course, refrain from lowering their targets at each revisions. Just a question. I know it's not necessarily a very good setup for interactive sessions, but in the room, could you raise your hand if you have read the NDC of your country, or if you have been involved in any way in the elaboration of the NDC of your country? Anybody? Okay. If you don't raise your hand, do not feel alone, and look around. Nobody actually has, I think, read it. One, congratulations. Two, okay. Burkina Faso and Thailand? Okay, excellent. Burkina Faso, Trinidad and Tobago. Okay, sorry, I could not see it all. That's very interesting. Congratulations to you. And for the others, it's not that you have a problem, it is that the system is not structured in a way to actually use all the resources and all the brains and all the energy and all the tools to actually tackle climate change. Because if you have not been involved and if you are not aware of what is in your NDC, there's probably a big disconnect between your trade policy and your climate change policy. And this is what we have been noticing. Now, about trade, we have to go back to the Kyoto Protocol, Article 2.3, which requires Annex 1 parties, so developed countries, to strive to implement policies and measures in such a way as to minimize adverse effects on international trade and social, environmental, economic impacts on other parties. So basically, response measures to climate change should not negatively impact the trade prospects, development prospects, social conditions in other countries, trade partners, being them developed or developing. So climate action can impact trade, and this is something that I mentioned at the beginning, but such impact should be minimized. As you would agree with me, climate change rules give a lot of freedom to countries in terms of what can be done. Now, let's go to the more, let's say, dense and probably binding set of rules, international trade law. So in the preamble of the WTO agreement, you find environmental consideration. And the objective of the agreements, so in their relations in the field of trade and economic endeavor should be conducted with a view to raising standards of living, ensuring full employment, and a large and steadily growing volume of real income and effective demand, and expanding the production and trade in goods and services, while allowing for the optimal use of the world's resources in accordance with the objective of sustainable development, seeking both to protect and preserve the environment. So the WTO agreements should be understood and implemented with having in mind the objective of sustainable development and protection and preservation of the environment. Now, what are the relevant principles of international trade law that could apply to environment protection, or that could be relevant in defining your environmental, your climate change policy? First, well, obviously national treatment. So goods and services of other WTO members should be given no worse treatment than like goods and services of a member's own country. I will come back to this later. And then MFN principle, an advantage given to goods and services of one country must be extended to any like goods and services from all WTO members. So, immediate consequence and principle, environmental protection should not be used to discriminate against imported products. This is something very, very important as we are at the age of the mega green packages. There would be a lot of discussions to make sure that those green packages, green deals and all, do not restrict market access for goods from other countries. And this is something that is very tricky, because there can be a justification of why you're favoring your local producers. So there's going to be a lot of discussions on that, and it has already started. Now, something very important. What do we mean by like product? What does the agreement mean by like products? These are actually products in direct competition for market share, or commercially substitutable due to their physical properties, nature, and quality, and uses tariff classification and environmental health impact. So once again, the environment is taken into consideration. And something that is very, very important, and I will stop the legal part of my presentation of that, PPMs, process and production methods, which is basically the way in which a product is made. And there are two types of ppms, and this is absolutely crucial for climate change. The first one is product-related ppms, so trace and impact on the final products. If you burn a lot of coal to produce steel, your product will have a huge carbon footprint. But if there is no trace of this coal in your final product, then you can say that the way you produce your coal is the use of steel is a non-product related ppm, so unincorporated ppm, which means it does not impact the final product. If you find some trace of the, let's say, the coal in your steel, then you can say, okay, I will ban from my country steel that has a coal content of 0 point something %. And this is something that could be fully WTO compatible, no discussion, because you're preventing your domestic producers from doing it, and you're also preventing your trade partners from doing it. So this is fair, this is objective, this is simple. But now the question is, what happens when you want to regulate something that is not incorporated in the product? And we had a very interesting discussion with David about this. You could talk about coal, but then when you talk about electricity, some countries would say, yes, I'm using nuclear energy to do this. And some countries would say this is sustainable. And some countries would say, yes, but I'm using hydroelectric electricity, which is better. Now, how can you justify that according to WTO rules? And this is also a big discussion that is coming with the CBAM, actually. So some things are still pending, and nobody can say with full certainty that there is full WTO compliance or no. And this is going to be a very interesting discussion. So countries are within their right under WTO rules to set criteria for the way products are produced if the production method leaves a trace in the final product. This is what I was commenting. However, they disagree about discriminatory measures based on incorporated ppms. So this is a big, big discussion to come. Just last point, environmental exception. So if you do not basically introduce unjustifiable discrimination between countries where the same condition prevail, or introduce disguised restrictions on international trade, you can take measures to protect human, animal, or plant health, and to protect the environment, as long as this also apply on your domestic production. So you cannot come and say, okay, we will not import cars which have a very high level of CO2 emissions. We will not import them. So our trade partners should not send them to our country, but we will keep producing them and selling them. This would be a discrimination. So this is very simple. You need to be fair, and what you are requiring from others, you need to require it from yourself. So this is also something relatively simple. Now, let's move to NDCs, now that we have basically defined the rules. And as you can see, there's a lot of freedom. Basically, in terms of rules, climate change law tells you that you need to define objectives, you need to have a plan, you need to state the actions that you are going to take, and you need to improve your contributions. And you need to try to minimize impact on trade, because there would be impact on trade. And then trade law tells you that you need to basically to be fair, and you need not to discriminate between what you're producing and what you are importing. You can have restrictions, introduce restrictions, but these restrictions should apply in a similar way to what you're producing and what you are importing. Now, for us, and this is also an answer to the question I asked at the beginning, how many of you have read the NDCs of their country? Since many trade experts do not necessarily, have not necessarily been familiarized with NDCs, we decided at UNCTAD that we would have these efforts of mapping trade into nationally determined contributions. This is something that had been done in, I think, 2016, 2017 by UNCTAD in partnership with the Graduate Institute. And there was maybe one study after that, but for almost 5 years, there was nothing. It was like a big question mark, a big unknown. And we wanted to restart this line of work and have a better understanding of how was trade integrated into carbon, let's say, climate change strategies. So we went ahead and with some colleagues, we analyzed 60 NDCs from developing countries. When selecting the countries, we made sure to have samples that would be as representative as possible, ensuring geographic balance. So we mapped NDCs from Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, Latin America and the Caribbean, and Middle East. We also looked into income levels, ensuring that we would map NDCs from high, middle, and low-income countries. Indeed, we only looked into developing countries. We also included LDCs, commodity-dependent countries, seeds, and landlocked countries to have a broad variety of profiles. And in some cases, for instance, in the case of seeds, you can see that the fact that they are seeds is very important because their NDCs would typically mention sustainable transportation, fishing, and also tourism. This is something that David will probably touch upon and is our super expert on that. So everything related to oceans economy, he knows.
Just a quick comment to complement. If you see the list of focal points under the Paris Agreement to submit NDCs, you will see in your own country which is the responsible ministry. About 70% of the cases are ministries of environment. 20% of the cases are ministries of foreign affairs, and very little sometimes ministries of planning or energy. But whoever coordinates will have an approach. So just remember that under Paris, we're talking about a multilateral environmental agreement, and the main focal points worldwide are environmental ministries that do not have competence on trade, energy, production, etc. So just to complement the angle of what NDCs are and where they come from. Sorry, Malik, is to support.
No, thank you so much, David. And this is actually a very important point that I will also briefly discuss later. So what did we find in those NDCs? I mean, what we found was actually exceeding our expectations in terms of inclusion of trade. We did find that there are a lot of trade-related measures in NDCs. Basically, these trade-related measures can be grouped, divided in two groups. First, you have measures that are indirectly linked to trade and primarily pursuing other objectives. For instance, increasing renewable energy production, promoting economic diversification, or greening industrial policies. But as I will show you later, these measures that are adopted to meet these objectives are can also be linked to trade. And then we found a significant number of measures, even though less important in terms of number, that are directly linked to the regulation of trade activities, the creation of market incentives, or disincentive impacting trade, such as tariffs, taxes, or technical regulations. And what we found that is also, and I will discuss that during my concluding remark, is that there is a lot of potential. You can see that the tools are there, but they are not necessarily sufficiently used. And this is why this mapping was important, to see how it is being done and possibly how it can be done better. Because as you remember, we're facing a major climate crisis, so all the available resources should be mobilized to meet our goals. And also, since we're facing this climate crisis, climate change should be taken into account to make sure that you can continue to trade. So, the types of measures. We came up with a quite arbitrary classification, but that that also gives you a good overview of the type of measures. So type 1 measures, indirect link to trade, we had renewable energy sources and energy efficiency promotion. So that's the first type of measure that we found. Green value chain development. And this is something that is very much in line with our technical cooperation work. We do have, as I mentioned, a project on green value chain and climate change. We also found that green industrial policies, measures linked to green industrial policy, could also be the source of the introduction of trade measures into NDCs. So these are the indirect measures, the three main categories. And then the type 2 category, which are measures directly related to trade regulation or creation of market incentives. We have technical regulation, including labeling and product standards. We have market-based measures, including carbon pricing, such as REDD+, where you do use carbon sequestration in developing countries to emit carbon credits that would be sold on the international market. So it's a form of payment for ecosystem services, and it's a form of international trade. We found public procurement, tariffs, and subsidies and tax credits. In terms of numbers, really we have 4 main categories. Green value chain developments is the second largest category. Renewable energy and energy efficiency is obviously the biggest one, because in many cases, countries, they say, we will purchase LEDs, we will source LEDs, we will make sure that we only import efficient appliances, energy efficient appliances. And many of these products, we will set up solar plants, we will set up wind turbines, and in many cases, those countries do not produce this. So they will source it on international markets. Even when they say we will set up factories to produce solar panels, it means trade, because you will import the solar cells, and you will probably also import some know-how. So renewable energy was big. Green industrial policy was big too, and my personal favorite, technical regulations. As Honda said, I was a part of the trade analysis branch, where we worked a lot on non-tariff measures. Okay, I will have to speed up because Honda, I think I need to finish at 15 or 30. How much time do I have?
You have a bit of time.
A bit of time?
15 minutes, and then we can go to...
Ooh, that's wrong. Okay. So, overall, what did we find? A highly uneven level of detail in the description of measures in the NDCs. In some countries, you have very detailed planning, you have very detailed way of how is the measure going to be implemented, linkages with other sectors. You have a vision for your national development. And in other countries, you have 3 words. And in some countries, we could not exploit the NDC because you don't have anything or not much. We also found, and that's interesting, that the ratio, the way country use the different categories is surprisingly the same. The level of development and region does not really influence that much. I can just say that seeds have a particular profile due to their economy, and this is something that David will comment later. And also that measure content might vary depending on regional circumstances and development level. For instance, in Latin America, we found a lot of plans to promote green hydrogen, and we found very little of that in Africa. And something that goes into the same direction as David was saying, you have the list in the NDCs of the consulted ministries and stakeholders, and in very few cases, trade experts are consulted. So it's not even an issue of who's your focal point. It's an issue who has been engaged, who has been consulted. And this is why it's good that you're here, because this is also a message that you can relay to your capitals. So overview of the results. I discussed briefly the type of of measures that you could find in relation with renewable energy that could have a link with trade. But what was very interesting with renewable energy is that it's a bridge between measure types. So overall, 38% of the technical regulations that we mapped, so technical climate change related technical regulations, so technical measures impacting trade and taken in conjunction with climate change, climate action objectives, 38% of these measures have been adopted in relationship with measures linked to the promotion of renewable energy and energy efficiencies. So this is a big part of the technical regulations that were adopted. If you remember the categories that I mentioned, so you have those 4 main categories, and about half of the technical regulations are linked to renewable energy and energy efficiency. For public procurement, this is even more striking, even though we have less measures. 70% of public procurement measures are linked to renewable energy and energy efficiency. And I could have made a point about this. When we talk about the inclusion of trade in NDCs, it's also important to understand that it's not only about trade in goods, but that there is a significant level of opportunities and measures linked to trade in services. So in the case of renewable energy, a lot of service provision, international trade in service can happen to set up facilities, operate them, maintain them, training the staff. So this is something very important. And in general, when we looked at this mapping, the results we have was that we found a lot of measures linked to so renewable energy in terms of services, linked to services, renewable energy, tourism, ecosystem services, meaning carbon sequestration, and some measures linked to transportations, but mostly for seeds and for green sea shipping. Now, green value chain developments. I'm going through a few categories of measures, giving you some specific examples of the type of measures that were found. Green value chain development, it's the second most common type of trade-related measures identified in NDCs. They can directly or indirectly target import-to-export activities, and they mainly aim at supporting the development of sustainable low-carbon productive sectors, increasing climate resilience, or greening operation and production processes. A few examples. In Gabon, we found a measure, for instance, that says that the main mechanism to maintain forest carbon sequestration capacity is sustainable harvesting and local processing of wood into finished and semi-finished products destined for export. So to make sure that the forests are sustainably managed, to ensure sustainable production in the timber industry, the strategy, the path that they have chosen, which is a wide path, is to extract as much value as possible from each tree, which makes sense. And you could add to that you could also add as much value as possible to your byproducts. And the end goal is to export those products, so to collect as much value as possible on foreign markets. By doing that, and this is one of the principles of, let's say, sustainable trade, by producing sustainably and extracting as much value as possible from your resources and fetching as much value as possible on foreign markets, you need to produce less and you can focus on producing better. So that's the first one. In Malawi, this is also more or less the same. Establish grain export processing zones and develop resilient value chains. The fact that you process your grains usually allows you to store your products for a longer period, to be less vulnerable to production spikes. This way, when everybody's production comes on the market, you can hold your production and sell it a bit later. So you're less vulnerable, you have a better storage option, and once again, you're going to export. If you're a developing country, or at least many developing countries, you will also get more value from international markets. An example from Bolivia, double the area under integrated and sustainable forest management by 2030. In particular, the need to access international markets for products derived from integrated and sustainable forest management is considered important. In terms of forest products, you have two types of products that are targeted by NDCs for export purposes. You have wood, and you also have non-timber forest products. And we had lots of case studies at the Trade and Environment branch of UNCTAD, where basically the idea is you cut a tree, you get money for 6 months, you harvest the fruits or the leaves in a sustainable way, you have income for 15 years. So this is also something that is very important. In Costa Rica, we found some green value chains, coffee, livestock, sugarcane, rice, and banana, that would be supported in the implementation of low carbon production systems. So this is an example of greening export value chain. And in Mauritius, there was the idea of greening the tourism industry through energy efficiency, renewable energy, water efficiency, waste management, and local short value chain for both the touristic, leisure infrastructures, and related activities. I will go fast. I think I mentioned a few of these experts. For green industrial policy, the overall goal is to lower the carbon footprint of the domestic industry or to green specific industrial sectors. Few examples in Chile. Chile set some, and I think Chile is here, Chile set some targets for green hydrogen use by 2050. 71% of green hydrogen use in cargo transportation, 12% of green hydrogen use in motor use in industry and mining, and thermal use via gas distribution pipe, 7% for housing and 2% in the industry. Indeed, if you make your cargo transportation more sustainable, and if you make your energy supply for your industry and mining more sustainable, you will make your exports more sustainable. You will lower the carbon intensity of your exports. In Burundi, construction and equipment of assembly and production plants for photovoltaic solar panels. And in Sri Lanka, continue fuel switching to sustainable biomass energy and improve user efficiency in selected industrial subsectors, including rubber and apparel. There's the case of the CBAM. Together with iron and steel, aluminium, fertilizers, electricity, and hydrogen, cement is considered by the EU as a good whose production is carbon intensive and at the most significant risk of carbon leakage, meaning that if the EU introduces a regulation to lower the carbon intensity of cement production, there is a risk that the producer would just say, okay, let's move to somewhere where we can emit the same amount of CO2 as before, and we will ship our cement to the EU. I don't know if you remember what I mentioned about non-product related PPMs. And in the case of climate change, this is really tricky, because if you emit 1 gram of CO2 in Burkina Faso, or if you emit 1 gram of CO2 in Sweden, the global effect is the same. So the goal is to reduce CO2 emissions everywhere. This is why sometimes it's easier to reduce it in developing countries through cooperation, but this is why when developed countries are reducing their emissions, they might be tempted to ensure that competitors do the same. Out of 20 African countries considered for NDC mapping, 5 of them had specific measures on cement. And there were some estimates about the potential cost of the CBAM for African economies. Rhonda, I will take 10 more minutes max, okay? Okay, thanks. So the case of the CBAM tells you that the measures taken to address climate change will impact market access. And for developing countries, this is also something to consider, and this is why involving trade experts into the elaboration of NDCs is very important, because you also need to know where your market access challenges are going to be. Technical regulations. I'm sure this is something you're familiar with. According to the multi-agency support team on NTMs, which is led by UNCTAD but includes a lot of leading institutions, UN institutions, they are documents that set out product characteristics or related processes and production methods, including applicable administrative provisions with which compliance is mandatory. It may also include or deal exclusively with terminology, symbol, packaging, marking, or labeling requirements as they apply to a product or production method. So these are technical requirements and associated control requirements that are set for the imports or for the production, the sale of a product. This is technical regulations. They form the most frequently used type of trade-related measures incorporated in NDCs. Why are they a trade-related measures? Because they apply not only to your domestic production, but also to your import. So if you're the government of country X, if you say we have technical regulation on cars, no car should emit above this quantity of CO2, have this consummation of this level of fuel consumption. You have your standard for your car. Your producers and your importers will need to show that they are meeting these requirements. And possibly you will have a certificate that you will be entitled to ask at customs for importers to show that the cars are compliant with that. So two main uses. Ensure that imported products meet the desired carbon emission and efficiency levels, including by establishing minimum performance standards, testing and certification requirements, and also orient customer behavior. Consumer behavior. I'm sure that you've seen those labels, energy efficiency labels with stars or ABC, something like that, that tell you, okay, the appliance I'm buying, the AC I'm buying, the heater I'm buying is very efficient, energy efficient. And this is a way to inform you as a consumer and orient your behavior. You will not go for the worst, the least energy efficient device in principle. You tend to go for the one with the highest level of energy efficiency. It's not only a financial decision, because you know that the efficient one will cost you less on the long run, but sometimes it can also be sort of an environmental decision. So, as I said, close to 40% of the MAP technical regulations were adopted in conjunction with measures aiming to promote energy efficiency and or renewable energy. The main products subject to technical regulations are appliances, vehicles, refrigeration and air conditioning, and construction material. What is interesting is that what we found in NDCs is actually what we also found in real life. With our trade and analysis colleagues, we set up a mapping because we have this the TRAINS database, this database of non-tariff measures from all around the world. It covers about 90+% of international trade over 100 countries. So we have a critical mass of data. And we did a search of all the measures, those non-tariff measures that were linked to climate change. And what we found was that there was indeed a significant level of technical regulations that were linked to climate change and that were affecting 83% of the global trade in motor vehicles, 48% of the global trade in electricity and heat generation devices, 44% of global trade in household appliances and electronics, 37% of global trade in motor fuel, and 19% of the global trade in commercial and industrial machinery. So what countries are saying that they are doing in their NDCs, they are actually doing it in reality, at least with regards to technical regulations. This is something that was really interesting. And as you can see, we mapped all the non-tariff measures linked to climate change, and technical regulations they represent the bulk of them. There is a small caveat. The level of technical regulation, the number and the stringency of technical regulations grows with your level of development. if you are a developed countries, you will have much more technical regulations, and sometimes much more complex than an LDC. And basically, you have this sort of curve that is really steep, and LDCs tend to under-regulate, and developed countries tend to regulate significantly. So it is very important for a developing country to anticipate and mitigate the impact of technical regulations adopted by their trade partners, and it's very important to have a dialogue between countries regarding the technical regulations and the way to meet them. I will go briefly on that, and then I will talk about our framework on NDCs, and I will open the floor for questions. David, I hope you won't be mad at me if I take a bit longer. No, he is.
No, not for you continue, but we might need to stay longer, at least half an hour.
It's not possible. We don't have the interpretation.
Okay, then I will be very quick. I think I mentioned a lot of the content of the technical regulations. So limiting age of imported vehicle, energy efficiency labels, banning some type of air conditioning devices. Now, very quickly, the findings of our NDC mapping and the findings of our technical cooperation activities, they show significant potential for enhancing the inclusion of trade in climate strategy in support of climate goals. So by introducing well-crafted trade-related measures in NDCs, your countries can go further in terms of climate change mitigation, and also, as I said, ensure this market access. So we are currently working on a framework to enhance the capacity of developing countries to integrate trade-related issues in their NDCs to support mitigation, adaptation, and economic diversification objectives, while preserving export capacity and market access. This is a tool that is being designed to support countries. It's not prescriptive. It's just a tool to help. So the idea is to identify opportunities and facilitate the inclusion of trade and climate change considerations into the respective strategies. This is my penultimate slide. Why is it important to do that now? Because COP28 that happened in last November was the occasion of the first global stocktake on NDCs, and basically countries took stock on what the contributions were and where we are going. And basically, and it is very much in line with what I said when I mentioned the climate crisis, the current level of effort is not sufficient, and it is very important to have a more comprehensive vision of NDCs in terms of how they can basically tap into the various areas of the economy to ensure that climate objectives are met. So this next round of NDCs, NDCs 3.0, which is expected to be presented end of 2025, is very important, and this is why we want to come up with this framework to help countries to integrate trade. And this will be presented, the framework will be presented in September during an expert meeting. And if we have funding, we will pilot it with a few developing countries. Thank you so much, and sorry for taking a bit more time.